Good day, everybody. Sorry we're a few minutes late. Alex was having some issues logging on. Um, this is our March Dalim Tips and Tricks webinar. Alex is going to be doing it on kind of database connectivity and Twist, just going through the tool and some of the settings and setting up some databases. He's just kind of organizing right now. He'll start in a minute. Hope all of you are well in these kind of really bizarre times right now. Hope everybody's keeping indoors and following everything that the local governments and federal government's telling us to do. So Alex, as soon as you're ready, crank it up.
Yep, as soon as I get these windows organized into some sane semblance here, I'll be good to go.
And I think just while he's organizing a little bit more, y'all should have received an email from us. We have shut our New Orleans office down just as a precaution, let everybody work from home. As you know, we're kind of are pretty capable of working from home without any issues, pretty much have the same connectivity. So there should not be any effect on the level of support or service that we can offer. All of our phones are hosted through Ring Central, so they should be working as normal and going through to everybody. So you should not see any difference, but we did close the office just as a precaution for everybody to follow the social distancing directives.
Okay, I think I'm ready to go whenever you want me to, Fred.
All right, go ahead.
Let me turn off notifications real quick too, so I don't get spam during the presentation.
Sure.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex. Today I'll be discussing the setprem from DB tool and database integration within Twist. I don't happen to have slides ready on me today, but the usual applies that if you're new to our GoToWebinar series, there is a zoom control in the upper left-hand corner of the main screen. If my window is too large or too small on your screen, you can use that to scale it to fit. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the GoToWebinar control panel. Typically, we'll do questions at the end of the session. We'll go through a Q&A. If any questions that are particularly pertinent to what I'm discussing come up, I may pause to address them. This is part of our monthly Dalim Tips and Tricks webinar series. Typically, as soon as we know what we're going to be doing for the next month, we put it up on our website. It's always the third Wednesday of each month. So be sure to keep a lookout there for topics. So I guess we'll get into the topic of Twist database integration. So today we're going to be going over some of the basics of configuring the setprem from DB tool, using that to read and write data from databases, creating one of your own simple databases, and also a few more examples of more complex ways this can be used to extend your Twist process. Because out of the box, if you're dealing with Twist like most folks do, you have a pretty straightforward workflow where files might be coming in. They're going through a PS check to be normalized. They're being output through OPDF. And that's where a lot of people started off. And over time, we wound up with more complex workflows where, for example, you might have multiple branches to accommodate different printers, for example, needing a different PDF spec. After that, then we branched into workflows where folks would start using the setprem from RE to tweak these settings of tools within their workflow so that they might be able to get 3 or 4 different settings out of one OPDF tool, depending on what the title code of something was. But doing that with setprem from REs can get a little cumbersome in the long term. So I'm going to show you how you could hook this up to DB to simplify things. So let's see here. Where am I going to start here? So I guess as far as basics go, we need to build ourselves a basic database table. And I'll create one real quick just to show you what I'm talking about. So I think I got some, I'm just going to copy and paste from off screen here. I'm using PostgreSQL for this. Twist can hook up to anything that has a JDBC driver that you can use to connect to. So if you're looking to integrate a database on your system, good starting places to look would be there's two open source databases, PostgreSQL and MySQL. In the commercial side of things, there's also Oracle and Microsoft SQL Server. If you're in a large corporation, you might want to check with your IT department or DBAs to see if they have a database system staged up that you can piggyback off of. So that way, rather than staging up your own system, you don't have to worry about the maintenance or anything like that. So what I'm going to do here is let me create a real simple table real quick, and then I'll show you how that works with Twist and how that's constructed. So I'm going to create a very simple table here, and I'm going to put some information in, and then we can go over what that is. Give me one sec here. Help if I can paste correctly. So the idea of a database is it's a way of storing information that might need to be related to, let's see here. So here's an example of how we might configure something in a very simple database. Let's say I have these 5 or so different titles here, and I have different print specs for each of them depending on where they're printing. So Alpaca Farmers Quarterly might need a PDF X1A, whereas this guy needs a X3. Rather than having separate tools in my workflow, I can use the separate from DB tool in my workflow to connect up and check what the settings are supposed to be for this title, and then use that to dynamically set my tools later on in the workflow. So information in a database like this is typically stored in this sort of setup where you've got rows and columns. So the columns here would be the different fields that I'm interested in for my title. So I've got my title name I'm interested in, my title code, because that's how I might determine which job gets which pages get which settings. Maybe a CSR email as a column, because I know that I need to collect the email of some CSR that gets notified at some point in my process, and then some of these other settings here as well. The rows are the actual data that's being stored for a specific entry. So the row, for example, row 2 would be the Alpaca Farmers Quarterly, and then you'd have data for those specific columns for that specific row here, so that I know that for this specific title, this is using web-coded foie gras as the ICC profile. So as far as how you would build one of these things, the SQL syntax will vary depending on which specific database you're using, whether that's Postgres or MySQL or Oracle or whatnot. But just as far as broad strokes, I'm creating a table here called twist.jobinfo. I have all my columns defined here, so I have ID. This is my primary key. This is basically an identifier that tells that marks a specific row so that I can reference that later on. Actually, I think I have. So that ID would be here because I've just defined it as a serial in Postgres terms. This would just be an identifier that references that specific row so that I can refer to that later on, either from Twist or from, if I need to cross-reference between different tables, I can say I want the record for row 4. I have my title name in there. Varchar just means that that's basically a string. It's a character string of variable length. Only thing special I have in here is a Boolean, which is a true or false term for, in my workflow, trapping is either on or it's off. So, and then I just use this insert into here to just insert a bunch of values so I could populate these with settings for each of these titles. And that's just telling it to, for each row I put here, it's taking these values and putting them into the corresponding column here. So title code, CSR email, PDF format, so on and so forth. Typically, if you're dealing with this, you might want to build like a little simple web application you could use to access this, that end users could use to access this. But for something bare bones like this, under the hood can work fine as well. So now that I have that set up, let me show you how a simple workflow with this would behave in Twist. So let me pull up my DB Basic webinar workflow. Where is desktop? And I'm just going to drag in these two separate files here and grab those process logs real quick. So what's going to happen in this workflow is files come in. There's a set param from RE here. Just for simplicity in this example, what I did is all my files are prefixed with the title code for whatever I'm dealing with in this database. So I'm just pulling out the first atom of the file name. So if there's capital letters or numbers before the first underscore, I'm taking that as a title code in here. Just a standard set param from RE. Then I'm going to a set param from DB tool. And there's a few things you'd configure in here. First, you have to select a driver for Postgres, or for whatever database you're using. So that might be MySQL, that might be Oracle. A JDBC driver is basically a little Java plugin that can be used to connect to that database from third-party applications that allow them to talk to the database. So generally, if you're using a major or well-known database, you can find these online. They're usually provided by the company that manufactures the database or supports it. And if you want to install a new one, you can go to New Driver, in set param from DB, and select it in here, and then it will install it for you. As part of that, I have what they call the JDBC URL here, which is pointing to my database server. I have my credentials. And then over here on the Extras tab,
sorry to interrupt,
I have my...
It's important to say that that URL is different depending on the driver and the database. So always look that up, supporting for the driver you're using.
That's a good point. Every database type has their own separate format, and a lot of these JDBC installations come with a template. So if I switch over, actually, I'm not going to do it there, but they have they all have their own separate formats, like Fred mentioned. So I think like for MySQL, it'd be like something like that, and they sometimes want different things in the connection string as well. But if I go over here to the Extras tab, I have my query in here. And this is just standard SQL that can be used to select information from my database. So if I were to go, let me sneak over here again. So what this is doing is, I have to play window Tetris here. If I want to query my database, what I can use is a select command. And select star tells it to grab anything, any rows in that, or any columns in that table. So the simplest query I could do in this table we built is select star from twist.jobinfo. The queries end with a semicolon there. And that pulls up all my entries here. Now, if I want to be more specific about that, I can always say I want to see where title ID equals 2, for example. And then we find out that I typoed somewhere in here. Oh, it's just ID in this. Ran low on coffee today. Or I can do more ID in 2, 4 if I want to grab multiple IDs. And you can compound those terms on top of each other. So I could say, or title code equals BIZ. And you can build queries to really hone in on whatever you need to grab in here. So now, in most cases, this is just as simple as you can get with the stars. It tells it to select all rows. Generally, as a standard practice, you want to specify the exact rows you're selecting. Just in case at some point in the future the database structure changes and you have an old query that's returning unexpected results, it's better to specify the specific columns you want to get back so that if there's an issue with that, at least you get a pretty severe error rather than having some kind of logic issue that silently happens under the hood without you seeing it. So title name, maybe I want to grab just CSR email. So I can just grab just those columns that I'm interested in there. So that's basically what we're doing here. Is at this point we're just grabbing every column in this table where the title code matches the title code that we pulled from this file. And if we look at these two files we just ran, you can see it's subbed in for the get mem we did there. It's subbed in for that variable, twist variable we called the title code for that file. And if we stick a show memories in there right after that, you can see that it did pull in the CSR email and the ICC profile, title name, all that good stuff for this. So we have it in there, but now we got to figure out how to use it. So the next step, there's two different ways you can do this. One's kind of the old school way. The other's sort of, I guess, how most folks do it now. So I'll go here. This is sort of the old school way. I did have some issues with getting a few things to behave in here, so I might actually have to restart. Nope, that's going to work for me now. So there's two tabs in here aside from the basic database setup. The first is this Tools tab, and the second is Extras. And this is something that I think has been a point of confusion in Twist over the years with this tool, is what the different use of these two tools, or these two tabs is. As it stands historically, the Tools tab was built so that you could pull data from a database and use that to override settings in Tools directly. The Extras tab was intended if you wanted to write data back to the database, or you wanted to pull information into the Twist table, for example, for if you wanted like information to that you needed to include as part of a transmit path in a delivery somewhere. So that was originally the distinction. I think these days most folks do everything in this tab, but just to show you how this Tools tab works, this shows you up top a list of tools in your workflow, or just a list of tools in general. Yeah, there's some visual glitches I've been having with this. I think this is a little too old school, this tab. There we go. So you can see a list of tools that were in the workflow at some point in here. And I can select any of those tools and click the General Request button in here. And then, so let me do, if I want to do OPDF, for example, I could click that button here. And it takes a minute, I think, to make the connection, but you can just type a query in here and then use that to set different parameters for the tool. Every Twist tool, if I, for example, go to everything that shows, for example, in this OPDF, if I were to right-click on this and go to Export Editing, it brings up a text-based list of all the settings that can be configured in here, and a few hidden ones that are only accessible under the hood. So these are all what you see in the list here. As I lose my, there we go. So I can basically take these and set them directly in here to a specific field in the database. I have two set up here. So I have one for PowerTrap and I have one for setparam from RE. Or not for setparam from RE, that's getting confused here now. Okay, here we go. So I have one here for my power trap tool, where I'm selecting the bypass trapping setting in my database where the title code matches. And then I'm setting that the isBypass variable or parameter for this power trap based on that field. So if this is true, when it hits that power trap, it's going to skip the step. If it's false, it'll go through and trap the file. The number 1 here, it's pulling, I have my regular expression up here. I'm pulling that title code out of the file name, front of the file name once again. At the same time, I do have a second query in here for OPDF. I think it's ppd dot version. So let me look at that. I can probably find it quicker if I go in here and look it directly. Yeah, ppd.version is the, it's just not displaying in here right now. But that is set under the hood. So if I drag a file in here, it's going to find the version from this field in here and set my PDF to be either an X1A or an X3. So let me drag a, I should close this, I don't want to save that after that change. Let me drag in a file here. Let me make sure my test from earlier deleted so I don't muddy the waters. Yep, that's all clean. So the OPDF in here is set to be X3 by default. This is going to come through, it's going to query that database. And you can see it runs 2 different queries in here that I had set up in that tools pane. The first was looking for the bypass trapping setting, where the title code matches my title code. And the second was looking for my PDF format, where my title code matches. And I can see that it did pull the PDF version one there. If I look at the power trap here, you'll see that it bypassed the power trap. If I were to drop in, I have a second file here. So let me make these tabs, it might be easier to keep them in line. Now this is a title that doesn't have trapping bypass. So when this goes through, this should trap. So you'll see that one went through trap. This one skipped the trap because of the bypass setting we had in here for power trap. And my files at output, if I look at these, I think these both should be X1As instead of the X3 that, yep, that's an X1A, instead of the X3 that the OPDF tool is set to be by default. So that's the old school way of doing it. The new school way of doing it, I guess, would be, and I guess my preferred way would be here. It takes a few more tools, but I think it's a little easier to manage. I have the same first step in here. We're grabbing the title code out of the front of the file name. This time we're running the query on our extras tab here. So we're grabbing the CSR email, PDF format, ICC profile, bypass trapping. And if you want to, by the way, you can test those in here. You don't have to always go to a third-party database client. So while you're developing something like this, if you click connect in here, then it will connect to the database if it can access it from your local machine. And then you can click the play button up here. It'll bring up a little mini SQL request window of its own So if I want to type in, for example, BIZ here, I can click execute and see what would happen if I matched that with the variable in my workflow. Or if I switch that to so I'm grabbing that info, and that'll be stored in the twist table. That's not going to directly modify the tools for me like the tools tab would. That's why I have here this extra set prem from RE. And what this is going to do is it's going to override those params for me in here. I have 3 rules in here. The first is I'm just grabbing the variables that got set by this database call. So those are getting stored into, for example, getMem variables bypass trapping is where that database variable gets pulled down as being saved. If that match is true, then I'm overriding, setting the is bypass param for this power trap here to true. Generally, if you're doing this sort of overriding, you also want to give these tools unique names. Otherwise, in a lot of cases, it'll apply for example, every OPDF in workflow. If you just put OPDF for some params, it won't work unless you specify the specific tool. You can also, they'll usually be, if they don't have a nickname, they'll usually be identified by the tool number, but those can change over time. If you wind up deleting a PS tech to replace it with a new one for some reason, then you can wind up breaking those rules. So SOP there is give them some kind of a nickname if you're going to be doing this sort of overriding. I am overriding the output ICC profile here using the same procedure. If I got back a result, specifically the dot plus here says, if this variable isn't empty, then set the OPDF profile name to that. Likewise, I'm doing the same for the OPDF here to set the PPD version to either X1A or X3. So the rest of the workflow is just standard. I'll drag my 2 files in and we should see pretty much the same thing again. But this time, I think I prefer that method because you don't have to go traipsing through all these different drag and drops here. It's a few more tools, but I think it's a little cleaner from a maintenance perspective. So you can see here's where the variables that came from the database are. These up here where you can specifically see the OPDF prefix, those are the ones that were being set by our set param from RE here. Now if I go over to here and let me pull these up, if I look at this, this should have, my OPDF is set to use swap, I think, by default. So you can see that this successfully overrode to Grackle. And if I pull up this other one, that successfully overrode to foie gras. And these should both be, I think, X1As, despite the X3 configured in my tool there. Yep, so those are both X1As. So that's an example for the basic writing or the basic reading data. One other use case where you might want to have this have a database hooked up to Twist is so that you can write info to a database for troubleshooting later on. Maybe you need to know when a certain file went through your workflow, or you just want information for statistical reasons. Let me go ahead and create, I've got another table here I'll create real quick. So I'm going to go ahead and let's create a table called Twist Process Log. So we've got a table, we've got several fields in here we're interested in capturing. The file name when it comes in, the Twist process ID and the host, the workflow that it ran through, the title code if it exists, the start time and end time of the workflow. And then there's a few other things that we'll come to in part 2 of this. So I'll show you the simple one first. So if we want to do a very simple write, what we can do is we just got one in the workflow here. We've got one set param from DB tool. Same workflow we've been dealing with all along. Except this time we're using down here the write DB box, which is configured so that you can write back to the database. So we're using the insert into twist process log table, and we're inserting all the original file name into the file name field, the PID and host into their subsequent their equivalents on the database, our workflow name, title code if it exists, and a start time. So if I take just a bunch of files in here, I got a whole bunch of PDFs here we can dump in. A few of those fail because they're just, this is a corrupt file, for example. Now if we come back to our database, and I look at that process log, we can see that we got all our files came in here. We got our PIDs, we got all the info we wanted. But one of the tricks with this is, what if we wanted more info at the end of the workflow? So we wanted to time how long the PS check took to see if a certain title was submitting files that took too long or were too complex, or we wanted to know how the pre-flight turned out or if the workflow succeeded or failed. We could always slap a tool in at the very end of the workflow, move the set param from DB to the very final step of the workflow. But the problem with that would be, for example, if a file hung and someone deleted it out of the editor, you wouldn't have a record of that. So one thing you could do in that case is you could have multiple set param from DB tools in here that work in conjunction or in concert to update this. So I have a second variant of this workflow. I'll go dump a few files, the same few files in again so they can do their thing. So what this is going to do is, first off, we're going to extract the title code again. We're going to use the same file registration we just did in the past workflow to input all the basic information. Then we have a second set param from DB tool in here. We're going to turn around and say, okay, that file came into the database. What was the primary key here, the file ID that I can use to update this record later on? So we're selecting the, I'm using the max, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So I'm selecting the file ID. I'm giving it a different name here, UID, so it shows as a different name in the twist table. If you don't like the names things are stored as in the database, you can always use that to rename them when they get saved into twist. I'm selecting that where the file name matches my current name, where the process ID and host name also match my current situation. Because if I know if those three things match, then I'm dealing with that same record. I did also put a max in here just in case I got multiple results. I'll assume that the newest is the one I want. So from there, what I'm going to do is I have a filter timer steps around this PS check. So these are going to time how long the PS check takes to normalize the file and then store it into a variable. Our PS check's also doing a pre-flight here. Standard power trap, OPDF, transmit. At the very end of the workflow, we have an update log set param from DB. And what this is going to do is use the UID we grabbed here to update the record, and it's going to stick in these remaining fields and append them to the record. So if I refresh here, these ones are going to get updated because these were separate files. But you'll see that we have several new ones that came in through the second workflow, And you can see it pulled out the title codes where it found them. We have start time and end time. We have the duration the PS check took. We have pre-flight status, so we have a file here that had a pre-flight warning, but it completed the workflow successfully. And we also have one other file that failed the workflow because it's a corrupt PDF. If I try and open it up in Acrobat, it's going to yell at me because it's not a valid PDF. I have the error node in my workflow so that if this workflow fails at any point, it's going to throw to the error node, and the error node is going to attempt an update as a last-ditch thing. And as part of that, it's specifically going to set the outcome of the workflow as error, so that that's flagged and that information gets preserved, so that way you have that information available for later. So, because that way you can also use that for statistics later on if you wanted to query to see, for example, which title code had the most errored files. I think you could do that probably with, so I play Tetris with Windows here. Count star. Could do so I could do title code count. Turns down process log. Should actually select this first. I can see a count of how many files came in from each title code to that table. So you can use that for reporting purposes later on. But as far as databases go, if you showed this particular database to a DBA, they'd be tearing their hair out because there's a lot of duplicated information in here. It's basically just a glorified spreadsheet at this point. We've got different rows. These are all just unique entries. So what if, for example, like M. Jones's email changes, or the printer that's printing a few of these titles decides that they want X3s instead of X1As now? I'd have to go in and edit all these fields manually. So I'd have to edit that email address in multiple places. What relational databases are useful for in this situation is that you can make relationships. You can store the information so that it gets stored in one place, so that you have, for example, a specific CSR record, and the CSR's email is stored in only one place, so that if that CSR is associated with 50 jobs, you only have to edit their email in one CSR record rather than 50 individual jobs. So I have one more example of that. I know we're running long on time. I have two more examples I'm going to try and cram in if I can. We're definitely going to go over, but I think they're worth showing. So the first one here is going to need a little explaining. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to populate in a few tables real quick. I have another window here with all my info somewhere. So I'm just going to populate all this in off the bat. Let's feed in some data as well. So what I've done here is I've done a basic MIS system, and we've got 4 main tables in here. So we've got, first off, we've got a CSR table. So every CSR has their own ID. They've got a name and they've got an email. We've got a printer table in here, so we've got 3 printers. And in this, just for simplicity in here, every printer has their own unique format, output format they want, with a different PDF type and ICC profile. And then we have a publication. So the publication is a publication code and a publication name. They've also got an associated CSR that's associated with them. And this is done by what we call a foreign key. So what we're doing here is this column references the ID of the CSR in the CSR table. So that, for example, here we know that ID 3, this is Tim Brand is the CSR for that. So that, for example, here with the F4, if the email address for M. Jones changes, we don't have to edit it in both entries. It'll be automatically updated because these are both pointing to the individual CSR entry here. This is what they call like a many-to-one relationship. So there's many titles that all relate back to the same CSR. So how that works in the SQL I have here, we have CSR has a pretty standard setup here. We have a primary key, we have the name and email. For the publication where we hook them together, we have the foreign key set up. So we have publication has their primary key is the publication code, the publication name, and CSR ID references this column, so the CSR ID from the CSR table, so that we know that those are linked. Now we also have one more table in here because maybe we're not sending, some of these titles don't get just sent to one printer. Maybe Alpaca Farmers Quarterly is so popular just because alpacas are wonderful that it's printing at 2 or 3 different printers at the same time. They just can't keep it on the shelves. What I did here is I also built a another situation where I guess this would be like a many-to-many, where we have a linked table in here that links different pub codes to printers. So Alpaca Quarterly is printing at 2 separate printers, and this table is just linking the ID for that publication table to a printer. I think maybe this will make a little more sense if I show you. I'll make a few views real quick that might make this a little easier to see. So let me, and views are basically just a way of caching, of saving a query. So if I wanted to view, for example, the publication with the CSR, I could run this query here. What this is going to do is it's going to grab fields from both the publication table and the CSR table in this case. So if I were to, maybe I wanted to add a, change M. Jones to M. Jones. Let me sneak in CSR table. I'll just edit it directly in here. If I rerun that, you're going to see this change in both places. So you can see the period appeared in both of those entries. So, but basically what this query is doing is I'm joining the results of 2 tables just for retrieval purposes. I'm taking the results, the publication code and the publication name from the publication table. I'm also grabbing the CSR name and the CSR email from the CSR table. The way I'm joining this up is I'm saying that I want to see these records joined where the publication, the CSR ID in my publication, that foreign key, matches the ID, the primary key in that CSR table. But I can create if I don't want to run that query every single time, I can just create, especially if you're entering this in Twist, you can just create views to do that automatically. And those appear kind of like a table that you can query. I'm actually going to make one more view too. refresh my view. And you'll see they show up in here kind of like tables now. So if I wanted to run this query from Twist, I don't have to, if I have that set up in my database as a view, I don't have to worry about remembering all this SQL. I can just say, for example, select star from the CSR. As I actually grab my one password. So we got publication with CSR there. And it looks just like a table, so I can just run this in my set param from DB and don't have to worry about pasting this every single time. But the way I have these set up, you can see that I have, the way I did these joins, I can see the, for example, the Alpaca Farmers Quarterly is printing at these two different printers. News About Stuff's printing at these two separate printers. eTrek Collectors Quarterly is only printing at one here. Now I built a workflow that uses this. So I'll do webinar DB complex. So same procedure, we come in, we're grabbing the title code out of the file name. Same sort of basic procedure we were doing last time here. I'm running two separate queries in here. The first is grabbing the publication name and the, let me refresh the, oops, I hit the wrong key again. So that's grabbing the publication name and CSR email from the view that we built up. If I go into, oh, here we go. So that's grabbing those from this view. It's also grabbing the printer ID, any printer IDs that match my title name in my link table. So if I'm running something for the Alpaca magazine here, it's going to grab these two IDs, 3 and 1. And since I have those two results, those are going to be separated by a comma here. After that, I have a fork in my workflow, and I'm going to fork on that printer ID variable. And then I'm running one more set param from DB in tool in here. And what this is going to do is, I think editor just locked up on me. Let me restart that real quick. Yep, we're coming up on the hour mark too. I have one more example after this I'll be quick on, but let me... Yeah,
we have a couple of questions, so that's fine.
Yep, let me... Okay, here we go. Get title info. So I'm selecting the printer name, the format, and the ICC profile in here from the printer table based on the printer ID I saw in that link table. So if my title code were ALPCA, then I'd be based off that I would have these two printer IDs, 3 and 1. Then I could go to the printer table and say I want these specs for. So actually, I'm going to try re-saying that. So if I go back a step here, yeah, we'll go back to the link table real quick. So printer ID, we have 3 and 1 here. This is going to fork on that variable so that you'll have two separate processes in Twistin. One where printer ID is 3 and one where printer ID is 1. When it gets here then, each of those two processes is going to run the query on the printer table with its specific value. And it's going to pick up the printer name, the printer format, and the ICC profile for that printer. Then it's going to use the same override we were doing before in the last workflows to override those settings in PSCheck. And we're going to transmit this time with the printer name in front, just so we know which files are where. So let me, I'll reopen this without the it being saved. And let me push in first. I'll do 8-track quarterly. This one only has a single printer listed, so there's only going to be one file output. So if we look at that, it only went through one thing here, so it only had one printer, so it didn't fork. If we go to our output, then you'll see that we have just one named for that printer, one file named for that printer. Now if I dump in something from Alpaca quarterly, then you'll see we get two different if you look right before the fork, you'll see there the printer ID equals 3, 1. After the fork, that's only going to be 3 for one of these processes and 1 for the other. If I look at these two, what they're querying the database for in that, so this one's looking for printer ID equals 1. This one is looking for printer ID 3. And those each then applied separate settings. So this one went with X3 and Grackle. This one went with foie gras and X1A. And if we look at those files on the output here, you'll see we got 2 for Alpaca. If I pull up the output preview here, you'll see this one's Grackle. This one is foie gras. And if I were to edit that table and edit in 3 or 4 printers and rerun the file, it would go to 3 or 4 different outputs subsequently. So if I look, I think this one is the X1A. This one is X3. Now, I'm going to shift gears real quick and show you one more example. I'm going to try to make this one quick. This is an old one that I did. I showed this on a webinar, I think 4 years ago, but it wasn't a database-focused webinar, so I didn't really delve into how it was built. So I'll show you this first, and we can digest what it's doing. Well, let me initialize.
Quick, because we're on the hour. So.
What was that, Fred?
I said just try to make that quick because we're on the hour now.
Sure. Let me just create that table. This is a cool one, so I promise it's worth it. So we're just going to make 2 quick tables. And if I refresh, we have 2 tables in here. Now what this is a database file organizer. Let me dump in. I have a whole load of files here. And I'm just going to dump them into this workflow. And what this is basically a miniature dam that's going to index these files based on metadata keywords. So what this workflow is going to do is each of these files that I just uploaded has something embedded in them, in the keywords for the print type or output type. So this one has, for example, gravure and magazine as 2 keywords. If I pull up another one of these, this one has litho and magazine as keywords. I think there's a few. Most of these have either litho or gravure as one of the keywords, and either magazine or advertisement as one of the other keywords. What this is going to do is it's going to index all those files so that it indexes them by keywords so that I can later retrieve any files I want to any files that have a certain keyword in them. So this should be done crunching in a second. Yep, there we go. I think we got all our info in the database. I'm just going to check to make sure I don't get too far ahead of myself. Yep, we got all the info, all my keywords. So I have a second workflow here where I can give it an XML file to tell it to search. A bit of an old example. If I were doing this again, I probably wouldn't use XML for this today, but these are basically just super simple XML files where I can search on a keyword. So I can say that I want to search for any files that contain the keyword gravure or any files that contain the keyword litho. So let me do one for gravure real quick. I have there's a second corresponding workflow, db get files. So let me do a search for gravure first. Actually, that's the wrong workflow. And I'll just error out. And this one I think is going to take a minute to run. So while it does, I'll explain what's going on. So this first workflow we upload the files to. What that's doing is when a file comes in, it's looking at the XMP metadata associated in it. So if I go to desktop here, just browse. I won't focus on the from XML tool in here, but just to show you in the XML what I'm grabbing, there's the subject. This is the keywords tag that we have set up, and that has the two entries in here, the litho magazine. That corresponds to what you see in Acrobat if I look at the keywords. I'm using setparam from XML to extract those. I'm setting a few variables for where I want to transmit this file. I'm stashing it at the path I at a default path in this that I configured in the setparam. Then I'm registering it in a very simple database. This database has two tables: assets and keywords. The assets table I'm writing in just the file name, the creation time, transmit path, and the Twist process ID. It looks like this in the database itself. So you can just see path, file names, and just a creation timestamp. Now, once it finishes registering the file, it goes to a second tool where it grabs that UID again based off the primary key and the Twist process ID, so I know that this is the same file. And I'm grabbing that UID so I can do a second query later on. Then after this, I'm forking based off the number of keywords I pulled in the file. In this case, it would be 2 keywords, so it would fork into 2 separate processes. Each of those 2 processes would write into that second keyword table the ID of the asset from the first table, and then that specific keyword. So if I look in that table, you'll see that I have, for example, for asset ID, I should actually sort these. You can see for asset ID 1, I have 2 keywords in here for gravure and advertisement. Some others have, 4 has gravure and magazine, magazine and litho. And these are linked up again to the file in that other table. So I have a list of keywords for each file, for each asset. Now where this comes into play is in the second table. And actually, let me upload my second batch of this test real quick so that I can cook real quick while I finish discussing this. I'm also going to run, I think the search for gravure finished. I'm going to run one for litho as well. Now what this second one does is it reads that XML file I put in with the instructions on what to search for. So either litho or gravure in this case. Then it runs a search on the database. It's grabbing the 2 fields where it's grabbing the asset path and file name from the asset table based on, for any assets where they match whatever term keyword we were searching for, that's going to give it a list of file paths to retrieve. This workflow, if it gets no matches, it ends. If there's no files that match that keyword. If it does match, it goes to this fork here, and it forks on the file name list. So if you got like 5 files back or something, then it would fork on those 5 files. It would go to a wait on here, which is set to look for those files and pull them off the file system from the location where they're stored. After that, it goes to a filter group where it waits for, I think, about a minute before a timeout, just to give it a chance to get as many of those files as it can. After that, it zips them into a zip archive. It renames the archive based on the keyword that I used, and just the timestamp, so that if I run this query a few times, I don't wind up overwriting my old results. And then it transmits those to another location. So if I look on my share here now, you'll see I have 2 zip files in here that just came in based off the workflow I just ran, gravure assets and litho assets. And if I open anything in this gravure assets and I look at the keywords, you'll see that those all have gravure as one of the assets. If I try it on this one, you'll see that also has gravure. If I try it for one of the ones here in the litho assets folder, didn't mean to duplicate that, but if I look for anything in the litho assets folder here, you'll see that those all have the litho keyword. So just an example of a simple miniature DAM that collects files and works in the view. Yeah, Fred?
Yeah, we got a few people dropping off, and we got a few questions coming in, so I wanted to get to those before I drop off.
Just 2 seconds here, and I'll be finished. So you can see how that worked here. Is when I ran that query, it grabbed the full list of all these file names. That's what it's forking on, and that's what that database query returned. So that's about the gist of everything I had to show today. As far as questions, do we have any questions?
So, yes. And say, 1, we don't know where to get toilet paper or Lysol. 2, does select happen before the right DB? So I think he's talking about the extras tab.
That's a good question. The select in here does happen before the right, but it's not, to my understanding, it's not accessible to the right, and because I don't think twist writes those into the twist table until the step completes. So that's one of those cases where, unfortunately, a lot of times you wind up having to have 2 separate DB tools back to back if you want to grab something in and
which goes to one question I think I had kind of jotted down. I'm not sure if I saw anybody ask it. Was the use of the connection pool in the database tab?
The connection pool is another good one to use when you're dealing with large volumes of data. The connection pool setting, Twist will basically keep a connection running for a little while after you run a file through the workflow, so that other files can all use that same connection, so it doesn't have to log into the database server and connect afresh for every single file. So that's something, if you have a workflow that's doing a lot of database activity for a specific tool, that would be a good thing to turn on. If you're running a workflow where there's there's a DB tool only in the error branch, or it only gets hit once every 5 years, then that's probably not worth it.
All right. Somebody's asking, what would Alex use as his format to generate the search query today?
Yeah, I was a little bit smitten with XML there at the time. I think the plan was I wanted to be able to search for multiple assets in one go and then zip them up. But I think if I had to do it today, I would probably piggyback off the Twist API, because the trick with that whole thing is that Twist is file-based, so it expects a file coming in to start the workflow. The problem in this case is we don't really need a file. We're just running a query out of the blue to tell it to find a bunch of files and then run with them. That's why this one, originally when I made this, I think 4 or 5 years ago, I dumped in XML just so I had something to work with. I think if I did it today, I would probably use a Twist API command to start the workflow with just a dummy file somewhere, and then I could just add as like a PPD variable. I could, as I click the wrong button here, as a like a PPD variable fed in through that API, I could just tell it the keyword that way. That way you don't have to write XML every time you want to do a query.
Someone's asking, does the fork tool require multiple hard workers? Yes, it would on a new process for every fork, if you're forking and doing anything down the road. And somebody's asking, can the set param from XML pull PDF metadata?
Yes, I did a pretty extensive webinar on this. I think that was 4 years ago. I got your name here. I'll send you an email with that webinar if you're interested in that, because I did something that showcased how you could pull that information. But yeah, PDF metadata is generally XMP based, and XMP is derived from XML. So you may have to mess with it a little in Twist to get it working, but you can pull that metadata out with setparam from XML.
All right, and I think that's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining, and stay safe, everyone.
All right. Thanks a lot. Well, hopefully we'll have our next webinar third Wednesday of April, and hopefully things will be back to normal, or at least getting close to normal by then. So everyone stay healthy, and we'll talk to you next time.